In this video, we will discuss the Week 6 file handling concepts and solutions to the challenge questions for IT 140. This is Linda Gaston, your instructor. The video topics include reading from a file, writing to a file, handling fixed length records, handling variable length records, and the challenge question solutions. Reading from a file in Python is relatively easy. You don't need a special library. You just need to take advantage of some of the built-in functions in Python. In order to open a file for reading or even writing in Python, you just simply use the built-in open function in Python. This open function returns a file object, which has, among other things, a read method that helps you to read the content of the file. So the syntax to open a file object in Python is as follows. You have a file object, and you'll see as we progress through the video this will be a variable name, equals open the file name and the mode that you want to open the file. So you see here the file object is going to be a variable here that we're going to use to open the file. So it's important to understand why we do some of the things we do in our programs. We need to open files in Python before we can use them. This will restrict the file from being used by another program that may be running on your computer, or if you're on a web server that may be trying to access the same file as you, and this can cause contention in terms of both programs trying to use the file at the same time. So once again, here's the syntax of the instruction that we use to open a file in Python. So we have a file object that's going to be created when we open our file. Now notice there are different modes that we can open a file in. The first one here is R, which is read mode. So this would mean we're opening a file to read its contents, not to add or create content to that file, but simply to read it. There are other modes that include W, which means we will either create a new file when we open it or overwrite an existing file if it already exists. A is another mode that we'll use in our exercises, the challenge exercises, and this is a pin mode, and it adds content to the end of a file. It can also be used to create a new file. So once again, here's our syntax to open a file. We can also have a second mode when we're opening the file. For example, we can open a file in RT mode, which means we're reading a text file, or RB mode, which means we're reading a binary file, or WT to write a text, or WB to write a binary. Python files are either text or binary files. We can also use read to read information from a file, or read line to read line by line in a file. And then we have to close the file when we're done with it, and there's the same variable name that is the file object is used to close that file. So we are using in this case the file object's read open method. We'll use its read method, and here we are using its close method. Files need to be identified using a name. If your file is in the same directory as your Python code, you don't need a path. Otherwise, you do need a path or a URL to tell your Python program where the file is located. So here's a path here using a Windows directory structure to a file named filename.txt. Here is where this text file is residing on a server, and we're giving it a URL to identify where it's located. The formatting can be different depending on the operating system and the storage type where your program, the storage type of your file, or where your program may be running. So once again, we can read an entire file at one time, and we can store the contents in a variable. So notice we are using the open method from Python where we're specifying the file path and the method that we want to open the file, and we're assigning that file object to this variable named myFile. And you'll see it in use in a moment. So here we have another example where we're fully specifying a path for an exotic birds text file. So it's located in a directory called text files that resides in a directory called content. And we're going to assign that path to this variable. So now when we open our file, we'll use the path. Instead of just a simple file name, we need a path here. We're going to open it in read mode, and we're going to assign this to the file object myFile1. So myFile1 is now the file object that references this file. So we're going to use the read method of the file object that we got from the open statement in Python, and we're going to assign what we get from reading the file to a variable called birds. Then we're going to print out the content of birds. So when we read a text file into a single variable, it ends up being a string. So we're going to print out that entire string. Now let's do our first challenge question. In this challenge question, you're going to be passed a file path P, a string S from the command line, and you're to output the number of times the string S that you get from the command line appears in the file P. So let's see how we might tackle this problem. So first, in the usual manner, we're going to load in our command line arguments. So P will be the path and S will be the string. So your code goes here. So as discussed, we're going to open that file that's located in the path for reading, and we're going to get our file object here. Now we're going to use the read method of the file object to get the data that we're going to put in this variable that's called data. Now we can use the count method of data to count the number of times this string appears in data. And that count we're going to put in a variable called string num. Then we're going to print string num, and we're going to close our file. We're going to use the close method of this file object. Notice how in Python everything is really an object with methods that we can use. Notice here we have this data variable, and we're using the count method attached to this data variable to count the number of times the string appears. Writing to a Python file is relatively easy as well. We still need to open the file, but we use different modes. We use different parameters. X will create a file. If the file already exists, you'll get an error. A will append. W will write data if the specified file does not exist. You can write the contents of a variable to a file, and you're going to see an example of how we put data in a variable and then we write it out to a file. If you want to read the contents of the file and open it again, just simply open it with the mode of R. Here's an example. Here's our file, myfile.txt. We're going to open it in append mode. That means we're adding data to the end of the file. So here we use the open method. We're going to get a file object representing myfile.txt. It's going to go in F. Now we're going to use the write method of this file object to add some content to the end of the file, and then we're going to close it. Next, we can open and read the file after we've done this appending here. Notice this is appending because we opened the file with the mode of A. So instead of simply writing to the file, it will add it to the end of any content that is in the file. So now we're going to open the file with the mode of R because we simply want to read it, and then we're going to use the read method of this file object to get its contents. Those contents now are inside of the parentheses that is for what we're going to print. So this is a nice shorthand way of reading using the read method to get the contents of the file and then printing it in one statement. Our next challenge is writing a text file. In this challenge, you're getting a file path for an input file I and a file path for output O and a string S and a string T. So we're supposed to read the contents of our input file, replace each occurrence of the string S with the string T, and write the resulting information to the file O. And we should replace O if it already exists. So that's a clue about the mode we're going to use when we open the file O. So first we're going to get our file path from the command line. We're going to get our command line variables. So here's the path to the input file. This is our original data. Then we're going to have a file path so that we know where to write our output that we're going to change when we replace the string S with string T. Then we have the strings that we're going to use in our program, S and T. So the first thing we're going to do is open the file I for input in read mode. We're going to get a file object to represent that file. Now we're going to say original data. That's the data before we make any string replacements. We're going to get that from using the read method of the file1 object that we got here when we issued this open command. So now we read this data and then we put it in here in this variable original data. Now we're going to create new content by replacing all occurrences of S with T. So after replacing all occurrences of S with T, we complete the program by opening the output file in write mode. So here we have O and W, and then we write the new data that we created here to the file. We close the input file and we close the output file, and that's the solution to 4.5, writing a text file. So let's talk a bit about fixed length records. So fixed length records are simply files that have specified lengths for the fields that are inside of them. So in this particular case, we have a first name that's 16 characters, a last name that's 16 characters, and an 8-digit birthday that consists of day, day, month, month, and year, 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 year order. Okay, so 4 digits for the year, 2 digits for the month, 2 digits for the day. Now we can use a strip function to remove white space here to make searches easier or working with this data easier, but this is fixed length data. Now it appears here as if it's in individual records. This is just for illustrative purposes. Actually, this is one long set of data. Now let's take a look at the coding challenge 5.3 for fixed length records. We're going to be passed the file name P, the first name F, last name L, and a new birthday. We're to load the fixed length record file. That's going to be all of the records that we see here. And then we're going to search for the first name and the last name in the first and change the birthday to B. So each record has a fixed length of 40. After we replace the birthday for the specified first name and last name that we've been given, then we're going to save the file. So here's the solution to this challenge exercise. So in the normal manner, we're going to import in our variables that we need to solve this problem from the console. So the file name is in P, first name, last name, and birthday. So we're going to open the file and get its contents first. So we're going to open the file P in read mode, and here is our file object here, F. We're going to use the read method of our file object to read this data into the data variable. So we read the contents of P into data. We're going to close the file F because we really don't need it anymore. What we need is in this variable data. So basically, we're going to create a list of all of the records. So this is almost like the 2D list that we've been doing before. So we start out with a record list that's going to contain all of the individual records that we are getting from our fixed length file. So here's our fixed length file with all of the first name, last name, birthdays here. And we're going to simply create this 2D list. We're going to take the first name and put it here, the last name here, and the birthday here. Then we'll scoot down to the next set of first name, last name, and birthdays and put it here, so forth and so on. So then we end up with this 2D array. So that's what this while loop is doing. So while the length of data is greater than 0, so while we still have data, we're going to append the first set of 16 characters in a record, the second set of 16 characters in this record, and then the birthday, which is the final 8 characters. And then what we're going to do is append that into this record list, which is really this. So we're going to break these out into individual records and append it to the record list. Notice this structure here, this statement here. Data equals data with this type of designation for the elements in the list. This simply says get the rest of the characters starting at 40. So we're going to get the first 40, then we're going to start at 40 to get the next 40, and then we're going to start at 40 to get the next 40. So as we're progressively bringing these into this record list, we're going to keep progressing through data to get the elements that will go into the list to build the 2D list. So now that we have everything in our record list, after we go through this while loop, we'll continue to do so until we don't have any more data. Then we're going to use a for loop where we're going to go through this list of data. We're going to strip out the spaces on the first name and the last name, and we're going to ask if the record that we have here is a match. So for each record, we're going to strip out the spaces, compare it to the first name we've been given. We'll do similarly with the last name and compare it, and then we'll compare the birthday. And then we're going to write the record to this output variable, and we're going to write the output variable to the file, and then we're going to close it. So as you can see here, the for loop will keep taking us through the items that we put in the record list, and we'll keep comparing the first name, the last name, and the birthday to determine if we have the record that matches the attributes, the first and last name that we have here. If it does, we'll replace the birthday and then we'll write the record. Next, let's talk about variable length records. Now, these are records that are not fixed in length. They can have various sizes. The fields can have various sizes. The good news about these types of records is that they are efficient from a storage standpoint. So you only store what is needed. Here, with this record type, notice all the blanks. We really don't need 16 characters for every first and last name, but we set these field sizes just in case we do need that amount of space in a fixed length record. In a variable length record, we just store what we need. But it can be more complex to read because we don't know where the end of one field is and the beginning of another is. With fixed length records, we can tell by the size. So variable length records use delimiters to separate the data. Each record is one line long, and each line is delimited by a new line delimiter. So in this particular case, we do have records that are read out in separate read statements. So let's talk about the coding challenge. In this coding challenge, we're to read a pipe delimited file P, and that just simply means that it has these characters, these delimiters between each field. So the file is organized with 3 fields on each line: first name, pipe, last name, pipe, birthday. So we want to search for the first name and the last name and replace the birthday with B in a similar manner as we have done with the fixed length record challenge. So the steps are: open the file, read the file. We're going to create a 2D array to store all of the records, and then we're going to find the index of the name that we are searching for, and then we're going to change the birthday. So here is the solution to this challenge question. Let's walk through it together. So notice, in the usual manner, we're getting our variables from the console for the path, first name, last name, and birthday. And then we have some helper functions here that are going to help us to do the work that needs to be done for this particular challenge question. But let's start at the very beginning of the program, which starts down at the bottom. We want to have the functions at the top of the program so that they'll be interpreted by the Python interpreter and ready for use in our program in the main body here. So the first thing we're going to do is load our records from the file into the 2D array. And we're going to do that by calling this function load 2D array from file, and we're going to pass it the path. The result of this function is going to go in this variable records. So let's take a look at the load 2D array from file P, with P as the parameter that's passed to it function. So here is the function. We're going to load 2D array from file. P will be passed in here. This file path is just a placeholder, you may recall from our segment on functions. So first we're going to open the file using the file path that was passed to the function. This is going to be our file object here. Then we're going to read the contents of that file and assign it to this variable T. So now we have all of the information in this variable T. The line returns for each line of the file and the pipes for each field within each line. So now we're going to do a for loop, and we're going to do this for loop in range starting at 0 to the length of this lines file where we read in all of our individual data. We're going to create the rows for our 2D list here, and then we're going to create the columns for each of the rows in the 2D list with this statement here, where we're going to split on the pipe. So we split on the /n for line feed to get each one of these rows, and then we're going to split on the pipes to get the fields within each row, which will build up the columns. So I'm just using this little matrix here so that you can picture what we're doing. We're reading in the rows, and then we're breaking the rows up by splitting on the pipe. So let's continue on. Now we have our 2D array that we've created. Let's go back to the main portion of our program. We're going to find out which index, if any, has the names we're hunting for. So we were given those names in F and L that were passed to us from the console. So we're going to call this function index we are hunting, and it's going to equal, this particular variable index we are hunting is going to equal the result of calling this function find index and passing the 2D array to it and passing the first and last name to it. So here we are in this function, and this is where we search for the first name and the last name that we are passing in here. So notice this is a 2D array, so we're going to use our iteration variable for the rows, and then the column we're just going to ask if it's the first name, which is the column 0, or is it the last name, which is column 1. This is where we do our search. So if we find the record, we're going to return the index of where the record resided in the 2D array. Otherwise, we're going to return -1 to the calling statement. So notice that's going to be this variable index we are hunting. So the result of calling this function will go in this variable. The next thing we're going to do is set the birthday record to the one we were passed. So we're going to pass the 2D array that was returned here, the index of the record that we found when we were searching for the first name and last name, and then the birthday. We're going to pass that to a function called setBirthday, and that's the function that's going to change the birthday if we were able to find a match. So here's our setBirthday function. It takes in the 2D array, the index of the match that we found, and the new birthday. It asks if the index is greater than or equal to 0. If that's the case, that means we found a match, and it's going to replace that index with the new birthday. Then we convert the 2D array back into a string, and then we're going to write that string to the file. I hope seeing the solutions to these challenge questions helped you. I encourage you to read the chapters, go through the information in Codio, and if you still have questions, please contact me to arrange a virtual office appointment where we can walk through your code and walk through the solutions together. It's not too late to get additional points on these exercises. Thank you.